to the Fitterest Show with your host, Christopher Allen, where we explore the art of mind and body conditioning. Welcome, and in today's episode of the Fitterest Show, we're going to take a look at the carnivore diet, which has garnered quite a bit of attention in recent years. It's a very restrictive diet that consists essentially of meat, fish, and other animal foods like eggs and some other dairy products like cheese. It excludes essentially all other food: fruits, vegetables, starches, grains, nuts, seeds, pretty much everything that's not an animal food. This diet generally contradicts, quote, conventional wisdom in years of dietary research that supports a much more encompassing diet for overall health, disease prevention, and longevity. The carnivore diet does have a growing amount of anecdotal evidence, coupled with a range of opinions and theories, but no real scientific research yet exists that substantiates the carnivore diet. Does it help with weight loss? Is the carnivore diet sustainable? Does it give you energy throughout the day? Do you get cravings? We'll explore these and other questions relating to the carnivore diet in today's episode of the Fitterest Show. So let's dive in. But before we dive in, let's take a look at a recent medical study. So this is a longitudinal Danish study with over 56,000 participants over a span of 23 years. So this study started way back in 1993. And the premise was to scientifically establish that eating more fruit and vegetables is associated with reduced cardiovascular and overall mortality risk. Yeah, it seems like common sense from what you've heard and read over the years, but the aim here was to scientifically measure that impact. And so what it did is it specifically examined flavonoids to better understand exactly how fruits and vegetables protect health, which is currently just less well known. Although a wide array of nutrients are likely involved, many researchers believe that flavonoids play a significant part. In general, flavonoids are considered to be anti-inflammatory and in general improve blood vessel function. So what are flavonoids? They are a class of chemicals called polyphenols, which are present in a range of natural foods, including fruits, vegetables, things like dark chocolate, red wine, and even tea. So across this very wide 23-year longitudinal study, what were the results? During the span of the study, they had, like I said, 56,000 people participate in this thing, so they had about 14,000 people passed away from any and all causes. So the study concluded that a dietary intake of both total and individual flavonoid subclasses is associated with a lower risk of cardiovascular disease and cancer-related mortality. So in the study, the participants consumed around 500 milligrams of flavonoids every day, and those were found to have the lowest risk of cancer and lowest risk of cardiovascular disease-related deaths. So above that 500 milligram per day threshold, there was no real additional benefit. So you kind of had that risk return plateau. So how does one get those 500 milligrams of flavonoids daily in their daily diet? Well, it's actually not that difficult. So if you, as an example, consume a cup of tea, an apple, an orange, 100 grams of blueberries, 100 grams of broccoli in a given day, you would have a very wide range of flavonoid compounds in your body and also meet that 500 milligram daily recommended total of flavonoids. So really not that difficult in the regular diet to consume those fruits, vegetables. Now, not necessarily unexpectedly, those who smoked and those who consumed alcohol consistently had an even more pronounced improvement. Now, that improvement, though, was trivial compared to the improvement those participants would have if they quit smoking and quit alcohol consumption, just to keep things in perspective. So I thought this study was interesting in that it allows some simple dietary changes that could help reduce cancer risk and improve lifespan. So I'll link to the full study in the show notes, available at www.fitterest.com/023 for episode 23. For those interested in diving deeper into the data within this, like I said, it's a pretty massive study and longitudinal over 23 years. So there's lots of really, I think, interesting tables and graphs and charts to peruse at your leisure. All right, let's dive into the carnivore diet. So again, the carnivore diet is where you eat only animal foods and stay away from all plant foods. That means you're primarily getting your energy from protein and fat and consuming close to essentially zero carbohydrates. So foods that are included in the carnivore diet are things in the meat category: beef, chicken, turkey, lamb, pork, fish, salmon, mackerel, crab, lobster, tilapia. Also included in this generally is eggs, butter, bone marrow, bone broth, some dairy products, cheese, heavy cream, butter, and of course salt and pepper, water, and depending on how strict one might get with the carnivore diet, things like yogurt, tea, and coffee are in sometimes, not in from the strictest sense of the true carnivore diet, but you see people including some of those as well. But what that excludes from the diet, there's no bread, no potatoes, no vegetables, no fruit, no seeds, no nuts, legumes, no pasta, grains, or starches on this diet. So it's a very restrictive diet. So let's take a look again. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence from the carnivore diet because primarily it's so new. There's not a lot of longitudinal studies on the carnivore diet because of its newness. But let's take a look at first some of the potential benefits of a carnivore diet. So number one, since the carnivore diet essentially eliminates all carbohydrates, it pretty much eliminates all junk food, all processed food, which is generally a good thing to eliminate from your diet. Other anecdotal evidence suggests faster weight loss, which again could coincide with the elimination of carbohydrates. Most people, again, particularly in the United States, way overeat carbohydrates, which is sugars, processed foods. Carbohydrates are generally attributed to most of the weight gain. Other anecdotal evidence improved mental clarity, some healthier digestion, which there's some cons on that digestion side as well as you get used to a new diet, and potentially improved athletic performance. Now, the carnivore diet can restrict calories and to some degree almost mimics fasting. So even though there's no general restrictions on how often you can eat and the amount that you can eat, protein, particularly meat-based protein, is very generally satiating. So you might actually be eating less but feeling more full on a carnivore diet, which could then contribute to the added weight loss. In general, the carnivore diet is gastrointestinal friendly. Since meat and protein are primarily absorbed early in the GI tract, there's less other stuff that could cause GI irritation throughout the rest of the tract. It may alleviate gas, bloating, irritable bowel syndrome, things like that. Another thing it could help with is the gut microbiome. And also, if you're eating carnivore, you're likely also to be ketogenic, which is ketogenic, different diet, not as restrictive, but it's generally a high-fat, moderate protein, and very low carbs, where the body uses fat as fuel rather than carbs. So in the carnivore diet, you're definitely using fat as fuel rather than carbs because there's no carbs. Keto is very similar. So the carnivore diet is an extreme elimination diet. So again, on the positive benefit side, it has a potential to remove any food sensitivities that might exist. Because you're eating such a narrow range of foods from a specific food group, if you had sensitivities toward other foods or other categories of foods, those could be eliminated and improve your health because you're not as sensitive to those other foods because they're not in your diet. Now let's talk a little bit about potential risks and downsides of a carnivore diet. So obviously, because you're eating essentially a lot of steak, a lot of beef, a lot of meat, it's going to be higher in fat, cholesterol, and sodium, which could lead to some health issues, things like high blood pressure. You have to watch your kidney health when you're on a carnivore diet in particular because you're taking in just higher quantities of fat and cholesterol in general. A second negative is there is no fiber really in the carnivore diet. So this could lead to constipation. It could affect that balance of the bacteria in your gut. A third potential risk is micronutrients and the lack specifically of macronutrients. Because the carnivore diet eliminates a lot of very nutritious foods, including fruits, vegetables, grains, all of which have some beneficial vitamins and minerals. Now, this is not only due to the high vitamin, fiber, and mineral contents of plant foods, but also their beneficial plant compounds and antioxidants that are also in some of those too. So another thing, it Carnivore diet could tax your liver, causing diarrhea. There's definitely anecdotal evidence when someone switches to a carnivore diet, they experience diarrhea when they first get started because their body is just adjusting to the overabundance of protein and fat. Another potential con is that the carnivore diet can become kind of boring, because the list of items to choose from is pretty limiting. So yes, you can mix it up and have ribeye, sirloin, flank steak, chicken, but it's still pretty monotonous. However, that same con also leads to a potential pro, which is, on the flip side, meal time planning, meal prep is generally greatly reduced. There's not much to think about. Even if you go out to dinner, you're basically having the steak. Another criticism of the carnivore diet is that it masks people's broader overall poor relationship with food. So when you engage in a highly restrictive diet, you're kind of taking an extreme measure to just basically say, you know what, I'm just going to eat one food group. I'm basically going to eat meat and some cheese, maybe a little bit of dairy. While it simplifies that choice and the diet, assuming one can sustain the diet indefinitely, which is another challenge, but it might not be optimal for overall diet and nutrient intake. You're probably going to need to do some supplementation with the carnivore diet just to ensure you get broader nutrient spectrum. Again, some of these are anecdotal stories that include things like some weight gain, maybe some bloating, digestive upset, increased body odor, increased tartar on teeth, and generally just kind of unwanted or lackluster results. With anything new, you tend to, from a reporting, even with the internet, reporting basis, you tend to see more of the positive stories, the success stories, people that had chronic arthritis and chronic illnesses that switched to a carnivore diet and magically everything is better over time. Now, there's lots of potential reasons for why that may be true, but what you don't necessarily see as much of is I switched to the carnivore diet, I felt energy levels about the same, but it didn't really work for me. My athletic performance wasn't better. It may have degraded a little bit. You just don't hear as many of those stories of the lackluster results. And I mentioned this last con earlier, but just the overall sustainability of the diet. How long can one stay on a carnivore diet? Now, clearly there are people on the internet, Sean Baker and others, that have switched and stayed on a carnivore diet for a long period of time. The question is it doable for most people, and does it make sense? So in summary, the carnivore diet, it's a relatively new diet that doesn't have a rich history, or really much of a history, of medical studies and scientific studies behind it yet. So there's much more anecdotal evidence rather than scientific evidence with regard to this particular diet. What's more, it's high in fat and sodium, which also really contains no fiber or beneficial plant compounds. And I think the sustainability of this diet is a valid concern. The ability to maintain the carnivore diet long term, I think, is challenging for most people because it's very restrictive diet, potentially unnecessarily restrictive. That said, I am a big fan of experimentation to see what works best for you. Some of the strongest proponents of the carnivore diet suffered from afflictions and chronic illnesses that seemingly got better once they switched over to the carnivore diet. Again, there could be many reasons for those improvements. Likely the elimination of foods that might have exacerbated the situation that just got eliminated completely by a very restrictive diet. And if you believe that you have food intolerances, the carnivore diet can serve as a great short-term elimination diet to really uncover and discover those foods that potentially don't agree with your system. Stories like those anecdotes do not necessarily equal good research evidence. And again, we tend to hear more about the positive stories of people on the carnivore diet because, again, it's new. There's not a lot of research about how many active health improvements and how many experience negative symptoms or no improvements. And due to entirely missing whole food groups from the diet, you're probably going to need to supplement your diet when you're on a carnivore with vitamins, minerals, magnesium, potassium, micronutrients that you would otherwise probably be getting in a more varied, balanced diet that included fruits and vegetables. Some proponents of the carnivore diet say that this is how humans have evolved, and if we didn't eat it at the caveman days and kind of like the paleo diet, that it wasn't meant to be consumed. But there is a lot of other evidence on the other side that says, look, if humans had evolved to be pure meat eaters, we would have a different digestive system that's much more geared toward a carnivore, which we really don't. And when you look at the human evolution of our our teeth, our jaw structure, our digestive system. It's much more akin to someone who actually eats a mixed diet. It's not all meat and all plant, but it's usually a mixture if you look at how the human anatomy has kind of evolved. Anyway, that's just my take. So again, I'm a big fan of people experimenting with regard to your nutrition, but you want to also be realistic about your health. And if you're not in a good place health-wise, you can test it out. There's nothing wrong with trying a diet for, 30 days or so and see what works for you. But in general, for most people, while you can theoretically get all of your nutrients from one group alone and potentially supplement with any missing nutrients from other groups through various supplements, we probably do need both sets of nutrients to be optimally healthy, and consuming both animal and plant foods in their whole form is probably the best way to accomplish this. And again, of course, as always, you should discuss and consult with your doctor or medical professional before making any radical changes to your diet, particularly if you're taking any medications or if you have any pre-existing conditions. And finally, the U.S. News and World Report actually has a ranking for the top 41 diets. I'll provide a link in the show notes at www.fitterest.com/023 for the episode 23 as well. And just so you know, the cookie diet, which is apparently an actual diet, did not make the top 41 list. Just saying. With that, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen to The Fitterest Show. You can follow us on Instagram at FitterestMindBody and on Twitter at FitterestMind. If you enjoyed this episode, please send it to a friend or subscribe to make sure you don't miss any future episodes of The Fitterest Show. My name is Christopher Allen, and make it a magical day.